Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Clement Gomes, who is bringing to us Sounding Out Science, incorporating audio technology to assist students with learning differences in science education. And I think this has the potential to be a really interesting and engaging evening. Dr. Gomes holds a doctorate of philosophy, a master's of philosophy, and a master's of arts in science education from Teachers College, Columbia University, as well as New York State professional teaching certifications in biology and special education. Since September 2003, he has been a science teacher at the Churchill School and Center, which is a kindergarten through 12th grade school for children with learning disabilities. And he also is currently the Department Coordinator of Middle School Science there. In addition to his day job, he has worked as an instructor in the Science Education Department at Teachers College. He also has worked at Western Queens Early Childhood Center, a special education preschool with a unique group of students with mental and physical disabilities ranging from delayed speech to Down syndrome and autism. He's worked at the Marymount's Science and Technology Summer Camp, where he has created and taught curriculum to challenge academically motivated and gifted children by using a variety of experiments and activities, including individualized month-long science projects. And he developed and taught the science curriculum for the Harlem chapter of Say Yes to Education, a nonprofit that provides educational support to multicultural New York City public school students and is affiliated with Teachers College.
I'll explain as we go on what I actually created for this research. But pre and post tests were done, and they were the same set of questions. And so 3 sets of pre and post tests were done. All the students were tested in three different categories and kind of mixed around. The chart will make more sense. So there was one group with no audio technology, automated voice audio technology, and natural voice audio technology. And the questions were all the same format. The content was on the body systems, and each of the body systems was the nervous system, the cardiovascular, and the respiratory system. And Likert surveys were done at the end as well. So this is a little bit of an explanation of what I did. So each class had 12 students, and so they were randomized in this way to really create an opportunity for each of them to use each of the technologies as well as learn all the content, because school had to still go on. So they were still learning this information. And that's how it was rotated. And I'm going to show you a quick sample of the actual technology. So this is the automated voice sample. So what I created were iBooks. And the iBooks were made, and embedded into the iBooks were audio to then give the students an opportunity to listen to it. 2 types of audio were tested, which was the natural and the automated. So this is a sample of the automated.
Tasting, smelling, seeing, hearing, thinking, dreaming, breathing, heart beating, moving, running, sleeping, laughing, singing, remembering, tasting, smelling, seeing.
And this is, so let me go back to this. So this was the automated voice, and if you're familiar with it, it's kind of a Siri voice. This was the research and technology was done about 3 years ago before the speech option was available on the iPads. So this was all done on GarageBand and then dragged in and dropped in so the students can play them. So they were able to listen to it in this automated voice, which is now very familiar to everyone. Then what I also created was this natural voice, kind of more of along the lines of like books that you buy books on CD and things like that. And I decided to use my own voice. I did a little bit of research on that too, and a lot of people said that it's better to do a voice that's very familiar to the students. So this is the sample of.
When a neuron is stimulated by heat, cold, touch, sound vibrations.
So the audio voice also same way, natural voice was also done the same way, recorded, embedded into the iBooks. And the students all had iPads. So they have a one-to-one iPad program where they are able to read carry the iPad home every day and read from the iPad. So the total length of study was about 7 to 8 weeks, months. And phase 1 was the qualitative discovery to understanding the students. So there's a lot of interviews, just speaking to the students, getting to understand what they struggle with. Phase 2 was the qualitative support. So that's where the actual iBooks were given to the students, and they were embedded into the units. So they learned about the nervous system. They spent 2 or 3 weeks. They read their books on audio, depending on the different formats. And then they would rotate, each group would rotate the different types of technology. And then phase 3 were Likert surveys, as well as follow-up interviews with the students. So validity, reliability, rigor, of course, these things were just using descriptive narrative information and getting lots of field notes and checking in member checks and triangulation to make it a good, strong study. So the dissertation was broken up into 2 pieces. The first piece, the first paper, was using technology to overcome fundamental literacy constraints for students with learning differences to achieve scientific, literacy. Students' interviews and observations and pre- and post-test analysis were composing this portion of the research, of this paper. So these are some of the sample questions that were given to the students. And so for each unit, they were very similar. So it would say, what is the major organ of the cardiovascular system? What does the cardiovascular system control? Or slightly modified to make sense, but it was kept very similar. Analysis was done, coding of the interviews, observations, field notes, identification of emergent themes. Gain scores were calculated for the quantitative data. And then an ANCOVA was done. So these are the results from the quantitative information. If you can see here, what we found was that the respiratory and circulatory system didn't have significant gains, whereas the nervous system did. And what was interesting about it was, after speaking to the students, they were saying how they were struggling with the vocabulary of the nervous system, whereas the vocabulary of the respiratory and the circulatory system was more familiar to them. So let's take a look at some of the sample words. Lungs, diaphragm, bronchi were for the respiratory, heart, arteries, veins, whereas the nervous system, words like hypothalamus, dendrites, these were words that the students had never learned before. So when we first analyzed it, it was actually, the data came out to be insignificant because it was done as one big group of all the body systems. So it was just like reading. Whereas once, Dr. Anderson was the one that helped me with this, once we reanalyzed it and looked at it based on each category, we found that the students showed great improvement with the words or the vocabulary that they weren't familiar with. They had more gains, which makes sense because they would start off with their pre-test being high and their post-test being high for words that they are familiar with. And for the nervous system, they showed great learning. So here are actual interviews with the students. So this one's specifically talking about the challenges with science words. So the students are going to tell you.
Like learning all the new vocabulary words and like trying to learn them in an amount of time.
Because a lot of the words are very like tongue twisty and hard to say, and then you just have to go over it and over again.
I don't think the concept is difficult. I just find like learning the pronunciation difficult, and I think the iPad helps a lot with that.
Some of them, because I've got really big words and I really don't know how to pronounce them, and I forget the meaning sometimes.
So you can hear them tell you that their challenge isn't the actual content, it's more of the vocabulary. So how can you learn the content if you can't read the vocabulary? So by using these iBooks, they're able to then kind of bypass the reading component, which is what they're struggling with, and still gain that information that they so easily can understand. It's just that their barrier is the dyslexia, which is the reading. So some of the techniques that the students mentioned that they used when they were struggling.
Once you keep looking at them and read them, it just becomes easy. It just goes back into your memory.
Like I'm reading subtext, for example, and I don't get to understand the chapter, I have to read it out loud.
Well, it helps me to write them out. Maybe if more than once and then to read over them.
And if you don't understand certain words, you can't read certain words. It puts the text out of context.
So if you can tell that they're describing this auditory component, so a lot of them read out loud or want to reread it and hear it again and again. And so this is where they're confirming this whole idea of they really need to hear this information. So that was the beginning, that was the first paper. The second paper focused more on the type of audio technology. So which one do they prefer? Do they prefer the natural voice or the automated voice? And do either of them benefit? So the time, energy, and motivation, utilizing technology to ease science understanding for students with learning differences. This one was more focused on interviews and observations, and specifically with parents too for this one, and the Likert survey analysis of what the students' results were. And so this really, it's motivating to how can we motivate the students? It's hard enough to get them to come into class and actually sit there and read, and especially if they're struggling with reading. So now, what can we do to make their reading and learning easier? So it was a 5-point Likert survey, and it was implemented on Google Forms on the students' iPads. I could actually click these links. I'm not sure if they still work. It's not letting me do that. Okay. I think it's my internet connection's not good. Okay, but basically they're Google Form questionnaires, and they were Likert surveys. They were 5-point Likert surveys. And then, so coding of the interviews were done, identification of the themes, and the Likert survey mean values were figured out, and a multiple correlation was done of the data using StatPlus. And then we created an intercorrelation network diagram. And so these were the Likert survey questions, and then their mean scores, mean values. So if you want to quickly read some of the question samples, just to see what they were like. And so when after the multiple correlation, numbers 3, 5, 10, 8, and 7 had really high means. And an intercorrelation network diagram was created. The idea of this diagram is really to it's very similar to the way the brain creates neuronal connections to specific words, like the word red. We think of fire truck, we think of apple, we think of all those things. And so what were these connections and how do they connect together? And so going into that, number 8 and 3 had 5 connections. Sorry, let me go back. Number 8 and 3 had 5 connections, and number 7 and 1 had 4 connections. So because they had the most connections, I focused in on those 4 questions. Using audio technology was helpful for me to learn the information. So what I did was, then I went ahead and interviewed the students, and this really, it explains how this information is supported.
I rather like listening to it because it gives me more information. Like sometimes when I read, I forget.
Pronunciation was better after they had heard it. And for some kids, comprehension was better when they were able to listen to it.
Because if I didn't know those big words, it read it to me and then I can define it.
So 64%, it's hard to see there. 64% of the students agreed or strongly agreed with this statement. And basically it goes into the idea that, they prefer to hear to learn. They learn better with auditory and with oral sensory input. And so by having them listen to it, it helps them. I like using technology. I think this was a very important question because a lot of students are opposed to it. They actually do not enjoy technology as a whole. And so they prefer to have someone sit with them and read to them, as opposed to having the computer read to them. 86% of the students agreed or strongly agreed to the statement.
He would spend so much time trying to decode the words that he wouldn't be able to take in the information. If he listens to it, he knows it.
It's kind of like she gets the hearing, the seeing, the touching, all of that helps.
So This idea of multisensory learning for these students is really, really important. And so because they're having difficulty with one component of learning, we try to use many other ways. And so using the technology, especially with the iPad, having the ability to touch, to see the screen, move things around, touch it, talk to it, it talks back to you, it writes for you, it reads for you. Having that opportunity is really helpful for these students. And so this is something that's really been beneficial at the school. I would like to use the audio technology with other science readings. So would they want to continue using the program?
We do a lot of multisensory techniques to help Chris break apart multisyllabic words, which would be commonly found in science. And then learning the actual vocabulary, what it means.
A lot of science words are hard to read or sound out, so that was helpful because they would read to you.
The natural one was a little better, but I didn't really mind the automated ones pronounces a few words wrong.
So they start talking a little bit more about the difference between the two kinds of audio, and this idea of the automated ones pronounce a few of the words wrong. That's actually an issue, because if these kids are struggling to read and the computer is actually reading it to them incorrectly, they're getting the wrong pronunciation, the wrong information. So it's really important that, as we continue with this technology world, that we do stay up to date with how Siri is pronouncing the word tsunami, or is it saying tsunami? Things like that. It's very important that this automated technology stay up to date with this, but also a preference. They do have a preference for the natural voice because it's easier to hear, it's easier, just listening to it is much more comfortable for them because it's a natural voice. But does it make a difference? Based on the results, both forms of technology showed that there was definitely success in learning. And then the last one, is science a hard subject to learn? This one goes more into how science and literacy play again. And these are all parents. These are all parents talking a little bit about the struggles that they have with their kids.
Would you think that some kids do so far off spell check doesn't even know? And sometimes it becomes more of the monster on the page than the concept. Well, you can't spell, you can't even use a dictionary. He doesn't have space so you can figure out a word from the context. But I think he gives up in a way. I think it all looks like soup.
So if you hear the parents telling you a little bit about what their situations are, spell check doesn't even pick it up. So they're trying to write, and it's so off, the spelling is so off that they can't even figure out the correct spelling because it's completely spelled incorrectly. And this idea of giving up because it all looks like soup. And that's kind of where this technology and this additional support comes in. If these students are giving up, this is the last thing that we want. We want them to reach that scientific literacy. We want them to reach the same goals as their mainstream cohort. So by providing them the support of this audio technology, they're able to then reach these goals and not feel like they are in any way, less intelligent. And they also gives them an opportunity to not depend on another person at all times. They're able to use the technology and do this independently. Conclusion. For LD students, dyslexia is not something that will be cured or can be unlearned. The students' skills will become more efficient over time, but not automatic. Assistive technology can be the bridge to helping LD students to achieve success in science education. So the idea that it's never going to go away as you continue on to high school, on to college, it's still going to be there. So what can we do to teach these students these supports so that they can continue on when they go off onto their futures, so that they can always refer back to this information and use this stuff. Some other additional technologies that are available that are also really supportive and helpful is the LiveScribe Smart Pen. If anyone's ever seen these before, they actually record voices while you're writing. So while you're at a lecture, you can write the information. And it has a special book and the pen has a special camera on it. So when you're home and you can't remember what the professor had said or the teacher had said at that specific word, if you click the word, it reads back at that moment. It's actually pretty awesome, and a lot of our students find that very beneficial. Read, Write, and Gold is a program, an application that's on the computer that allows you to read at the computer, and it takes in the information, and then it also it says text to speech and speech to text, very similar to what we have on our phones now. But that's more of a education-based, and you can also input vocabulary words. So if you're doing a history, paper, you can actually embed a vocabulary list of words that would be easier for the students to find. And then MP3 audio tests are another thing that we, definitely are using, which is basically taking a paper test and then putting it onto audio, onto iTunes, and allowing the students to listen to it. To take their test, a lot of our students have one-to-one teachers who read to them. And by giving them these audio versions, they can simply sit there, press play, and the computer will play it back. And that also gives the opportunity for us teachers to not have to sit with 12 students. Because if you set them up with the computer, they're pretty much working independently, and then there can be less assistance needed and more, try to gather teachers to give all these tests. Additional studies focusing on other audio assistive technologies. Focusing on other learning disabilities like ADHD, memory deficits, delayed auditory and visual processing. So these are all different things that could be looked into using this kind of technology. And then also English language learners, ELL students. So if this is beneficial for LD students, this could probably be applied to other different types of students. Okay. And I don't know if anyone got a chance to ask questions, but. Oh, no one asked any questions on the thing? Okay. You can do that, or we can just chat. That was just an opportunity. So if anyone, huh? Yeah. If anyone wanted to. Yes.
So the students you work with, they all had dyslexia, and that was their only learning difference?
So, good question. So usually it doesn't happen that way. When you have a learning disability, you usually come with many different disabilities. So a lot of the students did have dyslexia, but they might have also had other disabilities as well. So it's really hard to kind of find a student that only has dyslexia.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that should be considered and was in the dissertation, but to go into that, yes, definitely.
Do you find that even with the those tools they were talking about, like the pen and I think there was another program, that even those systems sometimes mispronounce or make mistakes with science vocabulary?
With the pen, it's actually recording you naturally. So it's actually going to record, like if you were writing with the pen, it would be recording me. So it's basically like a glorified recorder, voice recorder. But then it plays back when you hit it. So the pen is a little different. But with Siri, I don't know if you guys know this, but they update very, very quickly. So they're constantly fixing any glitches with the sound and the audio and the pronunciation of words. So they are getting better at it. This was done about 2 or 3 years ago, and we were noticing some. It's more of the inflections of the voice, and that's probably a reason why the students don't like it. They're like, it doesn't sound nice. It sounds uncomfortable. It sounds like a robot. And so the pronunciations are, because of the inflections, they sound funny, but they're pronounced still usually correctly.
Were there any students who you did find that didn't enjoy using the technology or prefer a person-to-person contact?
Yeah, only 86% really liked the technology. A lot of the students preferred it. I have theories as to why, though. But a lot of, about 10 out of the 8 to 10 out of the students of the 36 said they'd rather work with one-to-one with the person rather than using the technology. This also has a little bit to do with how teachers or people speak when they're giving a test, for example. They tend to change the inflections in their voice when they're going past the correct answer. And so the kids have picked up on that. They pick up on that. And so they know, and they're like, oh, I'd rather have, Miss August teach it because, she's going to read it to me. And, when she gets to C, she's like, oh, C. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, got it. So it is interesting to, these little, and they pick up on that. And so I think, and I know the kids that were like, oh, I'd rather use a teacher. And I'm like, oh, I know why. So it really does depend, yeah. But some students just they're not good with technology. They just struggle with the interface and, might be part of the disability. A lot of them have executive functioning issues where they kind of struggle with organizing their iPad and all the information on it, or remembering because they have memory issues, so things like that. So it can be multiple reasons.
I just want to know if there have been correlational studies to the idea of auditory learning and if the children were regularly read to at home. So if they were used to the idea of someone always reading to each other the thing. There have been studies about that, or youth book and stuff like that.
I didn't come across anything like that, but that's actually really interesting. I did read stuff about in general, literacy and reading skills went up when kids were read to at home by their parents. So they have found that correlation. They find that more modern families, because both parents work, they don't have time to read to the kids, and so literacy, they have found a correlation that literacy rates have gone down. And in the past, people would read to their kids or read with their kids or read around their kids. And so, it definitely shows some changes in that.
I have nephews and both their parents work, and they have little leapfrogs that read to them as they read. And so they're pretty young, both of them are 5 and 3, making read and stuff, but they aren't really read to them. It's a really rare occasion. If it's a person, it's really the leapfrog reading to them.
There's also, it's funny that you say that, there's also a difference between having the technology, going back to the other question about having a person. A lot of studies have shown that the just development of the relationship with the parents and having them sit and spend time with the kids reading, they connect reading with this kind of positive, happy feeling of mom and dad's around. And so reading becomes a pleasant thing. And so there's been research on that as well. So it actually is really interesting too. Not that it's on that, but I've read some of the stuff on that too. It's great. Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the finance of the assistive technology. So how practical is it to apply the technology to a larger scale to benefit more students? Is finance a problem?
So with LD students with special education, parents can, if they have an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, anyone familiar with that? You can apply for assistive technology. So if you are approved for it, then you can get a computer or an iPad or something like that. The school that I was working at already had a one-to-one iPad program going on. So it was fine. And it worked out well, conveniently for me. But yes, if it's an LD student, they should, and if they have an IEP, they should be able to get that from the Board of Ed. If it's a private parent or they buy it themselves, a lot of kids now have it on their own, so it's helpful. Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for kids who didn't like learning from the technology. You said they prefer a one-to-one method. Is there a more, in your opinion, long-term plan? Because moving forward in school, no student is, it's unlikely that a given student is going to have the attention of a one-to-one teacher. So what is a sort of compromise between having access to that and the technology?
So with students in high school, middle and high school, they can get a one-to-one. But once they leave high school, they're no longer, they have to figure it out. So what we're trying to do is kind of prepare them for college when it's much more difficult to get that support, and you're right. We're trying to teach them use these other alternatives, because when you're on your own, you need to figure out a way to do it.
So any student in middle or high school with an IEP could have a one-to-one?
If it's part of their IEP, yeah.
Okay.
It depends on what their, when they have their CSC meetings, what their group, their team with the DOE decided. Yeah. It depends on the level of severity of whatever disability they have. Because again, the IEP is general. It's for all students with any kind of disability, whereas LD falls under this category, and so they're kind of grouped under the umbrella of special education. And so they get this IEP. But if it's someone who's like autistic, severely autistic on the spectrum, they might have a one-to-one until they're 18, yeah.
And as an example, I mean, on an IEP, you could have questions read as one of the modifications that you're entitled to in order to be able to perform. So then that means that student to be tested has to have the questions read aloud to him or her. And so that they may not have a one-to-one person assigned to them on their IEP, but if questions read is there, then that means somebody in the school has to be assigned to administer the test to that student at that point in time when they're being tested.
Yeah.
That goes for state exams, and it could, so if the IEP can separate it out that it's just for classroom tests and state exams, or state exams only, it can actually be parsed in that way.
Yeah, even like down to how it's recorded. Some of the students don't record into the bubble scantrons because they struggle with kind of organization and visual. Dyslexia has a lot to do with visuals as well. And so they basically circle into the booklet themselves, and the teachers or somebody else has to transfer that for them. So there's many different things that they'll do to modify.
Do the students use iPads for their homework?
They do. They do.
What type of stuff do they do usually?
So it's broad variety of things. Depends on the teacher, it depends on the subject area, it depends on the student sometimes. So a lot of the students will use Google Classroom. A lot of them will use iTunes University, iTunes U. So it depends on the teacher. The high school uses laptops. The middle school uses iPads. And so for that reason, it's more of an iPad focus. But they do everything from completing PDF assignments. So the teachers will send it over as a PDF. They'll complete it on an app called Notability, and then they'll email it back, or they'll drop it into the Dropbox. And so all of it will be done on the iPad. Usually it's written assignments, and sometimes teachers will embed videos. They'll make them watch a link and then respond. So really, it's very, very broad. Yeah, it's almost like taking an online course. It's very similarly done, but it's an additional to the classroom. So, and then what's great for the students is that the resources are always there, and so they can always go back to the feed or go back to the website to go and find this information. But honestly, it depends on the subject matter. So like they can do a dissection on the iPad. Some of the students don't do the frog dissections in science because they're uncomfortable, so they'll do a digital frog dissection, while the most of the kids like cutting frogs open or anything open. So yeah, they usually do it, but there's usually like one or two kids who don't want to.
And my other question was, how did the parents react to all of this technology? Like, were they all happy, or did some?
Mixed. I think that most parents are happy. I think what the issue is that the parents are not as familiar with the technology compared to the students who learn it instantaneously. Like they're telling you what to, like, I'm like, oh, okay, great, And so for that reason, it also opens another world of, just information and exposure. I think that having an iPad is a little bit more difficult because it's smaller and the kids can go to the room and do whatever they want, as opposed to a big computer in the, family room. So at first, I think it was a kind of a questionable thing, but they have the parents come in and do a big presentation to the parents in the beginning of the year and tell them exactly what's going on and how it's going to be done, and that the school iPads are school property. So the only email address in there is the school email, and as soon as the kids walk into the school, the network picks up on the iPad and all the information is basically pulled into the server files and all that. So the kids know that too. So they're aware, of course they forget, but anything can be removed or added on. So we'll have like Timmy sitting in class, and instead of reading the book, he'll be on, some video game playing this video game app. If one of the teachers notice, they just have to call down to technology from downstairs. All of a sudden, Timmy's app just disappears off his iPad. And he's like, what just happened? So, we have kids who struggle with Safari and just want to Google everything, or, Google sneakers all day long. They just took off Safari from the iPad, their one specific iPad. So there's a lot of background. The tech department is constantly monitoring and making sure, and so there's a lot of like, you know, hidden work going on there. The iBooks that were created for the entire 7th grade curriculum took months, and so things like that. There's a lot of like background stuff happening. So it's great, but it is definitely a lot of work too. And yeah, different groups have different voices on that.
So all of the students, they had never used technology to learn science before this?
They have, but it's not as, it was basically readings on paper. Yeah. So when the iPads were implemented as a one-to-one program 3 years ago, also these iBooks were created and with the audio and then tested out.
So what age do you think is the best age for students to start using technology as assistants?
It depends on the disability. So a child with autism, I would say early, because they use the iconic pictorials to communicate. So it really depends on the disability, the age, the person. It's a lot of factors, I think. Middle school is usually the age that they start, in our school, they start using the programs and apps and technology and giving the students the opportunity. I honestly don't know if it is the best age. I mean, we struggle as adults from staying off of our iPads and Facebooks while professors are talking, you know? And to give it to a middle schooler and expect them to do the same thing it can be hard, you know?
I just felt that like before high school, I usually just use like textbook. I don't take notes on my laptop or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So at first I felt I was not used to it once I enter college. But right now, if you ask me to take notes by hand, I feel I'm not used to it anymore.
Right.
Yeah, so.
But it's like you also jump a step because then it's already typed out. So if you want to write a paper, your information's already there. Whereas when you handwrite it, then you have to rewrite it again. So you're almost doing double the work. And something that's funny is I was just saying how having technology in the classroom is a new level of classroom management. So having used technology for the last 3-4 years in the classroom, having all the students on their iPads, I actually have gotten used to being able to tell what the kids are doing based on their eyes and their facial movements and like their hand gestures. So if their eyes are moving like very quickly, you know they're not reading. They're playing a video game, you know, and if their eyes are moving up and down, they're scrolling through Facebook, you know, or if they're like, you know, doing this, they're sending an email, you know, so it's like, it's just different faces that people have when they're doing work or what they're doing. I think the kids are trying to be sneaky, but, you know, they're like, how do you know I'm playing a video game? I'm like, because I know everything, you know, it's just, so, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's just your facial reactions and things like that. But it is definitely a new form of classroom management issues. A lot of the students will use the iPads as almost texting. They'll pass notes by emailing it to their friends. So there's no more like, you know, sliding a note into your hand. It's just, you know, going through the airwaves and sending it over to the iPad, and all of a sudden your iPad gets a little note, and you know, you're sitting there reading, and then you're laughing, and you know, why are these kids laughing? What are they laughing about? And you realize that they're really sending emails to each other in the middle of class, and you know, they don't need to pass notes anymore. So it's great. It's really super beneficial, but it definitely has its drawbacks. So
what's your impression of if you're using assistive technologies to assist, but at some point, or maybe not, and this is kind of where my question goes, you want to kind of be able to have the student do the work without the assistive technology. And so it's like, how do you figure out the timing of that? So for this period of time, for this subject, the student needs the support of the audio text, for example. But at what point do students then start reading independently without the assistive technology, and how do you figure that out as a teacher?
So I think it's a variety. The key to teaching any kind of information is making sure you try to hit as many different kinds of minds as possible. So maybe one day you'll have one lecture be in audio, and then the next day you'll, popcorn read, and you'll have all the students try reading aloud. Maybe the following day you'll do little small groups, and then you'll do breakout groups, and then you'll share afterwards. So by having these kind of variety, just focusing and using only technology is probably not a good idea. But just using any one technique in teaching is not a good idea. I think the idea of being a good teacher is being able to bounce around and have this kind of toolbox of different techniques. And which one works depends on the lesson, depends on the kids, depends on the kid group that year, depends on how you're feeling that day, and just so many different factors. And I think that making it dynamic, making teaching dynamic is what's the key to being a good teacher. And not being willing to change and modify and not be rigid to take out your textbook, read to the next 30 pages, and so keeping it kind of fresh and new.
Wait.
Sure.
I was just wondering what New York public schools are doing right now. What's the most prevalent way of teaching students with learning differences?
So New York City public schools, they have different kinds of setups. So they have inclusion classrooms, which is they have their students come into a regular classroom, and that's been kind of the model that I'm pretty sure almost all of the New York City public schools are doing. And so they'll have the students come in, but they'll be separated otherwise. And so some of the classes they'll have mixed together with mainstream students. The issue, I think, with the public school special education is a lot of them are grouped together into one classroom, but they range in ability. And so if it's a higher functioning, a lot of LD students tend to get the 504 plan, which is being in a mainstream classroom, but then being pulled out for resource, being pulled out for, things like that. So that tends to kind of make more sense for a student with learning disabilities as opposed to an exclusive program, depending again on the severity. So it really is just a very open thing. Some schools are a little bit, it depends on the principal and how they set it up too, and so it's a kind of a difficult question to answer because it's so varied.
For additional studies, you mentioned that the assistive technology can be also applied to other disabilities, for example, ADHD. I just want to know, what are some of the technology has been used so far?
So with ADHD, I was basically using this audio technology. A lot of the ADHD students found that it helps them focus because they're then kind of blocking off outside stimuli. And so by listening to it on their headphones and then also following along with the reading helps them to stay on track. And then as it highlights the words, it makes them kind of focus in on what they're reading and kind of stay on task. So that was one of the things that they mentioned. Auditory processing, you can replay these. So that's another thing that's great. If you want to hear it again, asking the person next to you to repeat it can be frustrating, or I don't want to bother them again, I'm just not going to ask. Whereas it's yours, you're independently doing it. If you want to hear it again, you just hit play again. So it's like you really get to take control of your learning. And different disabilities. And then of course ELL is really helpful too. It hasn't been applied to ELL, the audio technology, from my research, but I think it logically makes sense that it would be really helpful. Any other questions? Thank you. If you guys come up with any more questions, feel free to email me. I have my email address there.
Okay, so Annie's going to pass out the exit slips, the little questionnaires, and if you are in my STEM Colloquium course, we're just going to form a circle up here, and you can give those back to me. If you're not, thank you for coming, and please make sure you give your slip to any on your way out.
Oh, I didn't even realize the time. I thought I went under. because I think I restarted the computer. And so I'm looking at the computer, I'm like, oh my God, I've only been for 20 minutes.